Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here and being part of our FCI Live 2024 series. This is our last session of today. We still have a lot more coming over the next 2 days before we wrap up for this year. And this session is Ownership Matters, the late organizing stages. And today I'm your presenter, JQ Hanna. I am the Assistant Director at Food Co-op Initiative. We're the hosts of the series, and if you don't know Food Co-op Initiative, we are a small nonprofit with a national reach that helps start up food co-ops in communities all across the country with educational tools, technical assistance, and support for those that are organizing their own food co-ops. So we're going to jump into tonight's topic, but first just want to thank our FCI Live champion sponsors, which are Colluminate this year and National Co-op Grocers. Thanks so much to them for making this series possible. We could not do it without them. All right, so we're jumping into Ownership Matters, the late stages. Real quick, I want to talk a little bit about what this session is and isn't. We could offer dozens and dozens of sessions over FCI Live, and it still would not cover every topic we could all discuss together. So this specific session is a big picture session. It's not a how-to. There's a lot of places you're like, well, how would you do this? How would you execute on that? And if we have time, we might get into that. But the hope here is to give you a really nice broad overview of why ownership growth momentum matters more than ever in the later stages, what ownership issues and efforts you need to be actually plan for and have a plan for in stages 2B, 3A, and at opening. And the session is really aimed at the needs of startups that are in stage 2B or stage 3. What that means is you may ask some questions that relate to things in earlier stages, and I may not be able to get to those tonight. We had a session on the earlier stages, and now we're doing one of the later stages. So I'm really going to focus in on those level 2B and level 3 needs. And that may mean there's some things that you don't know. You're like, well, what's that? Or we don't have that yet. How would we attain this thing? Feel free to ask in the chat, and those of you who are further along to answer, but those questions I may not actually have time to focus on in this session, as I want to keep the focus on the needs of the later stages. Thanks for understanding. Okay, we're going to do a quick couple of just getting some ground rules, understanding what we're talking about. When I do say owner, by the way, owner, member, member owner, these are all the same term. These are regional preferences. There tends to be regional preferences. There's all sorts of thoughts on why one term is better than the other. Not going to get into that debate tonight. Use whatever feels like the best fit for your co-op. FCI uses owner in all our presentations and documents, but respects and acknowledges all of these terms as pretty much the same thing. And a quick word about ownership goals. You're going to hear me start off with talking about ownership goals in these late stages. Ownership goals are not one size fits all. I'm stressing this a lot because I keep hearing feedback that we haven't gotten this across very well. So if you're watching this and you are in a very small rural community of maybe 1,000 people, or you are in a very large city like New York City, these goals that you're going to hear me reference, these are not standardized. There will be an example, but every co-op's ownership goals need to be different based on the size of their project, the size of their community. There's all sorts of, and there's other factors actually additionally that even in two communities the same size, their ownership goals and store size may be significantly different for different reasons. So if you want to learn more about that, we have an entire video on ownership growth planning that will give you an overview of how you choose those ownership goals. And again, it's an overview. You have to sharpen them down and specialize them to your co-op. If you want to learn more about that in more detail and you've already watched the video, reach out to me at jq@fci.coop and we can talk, but we won't be covering that tonight. Okay, some assumptions. If you're thinking about ownership growth in stage 2B and stage 3, I am assuming you are walking in with the tools necessary to be successful at ownership growth as you continue to build the business in these stages. What are those things I'm assuming? These are the things that I'm not going to go into more depth about how you accomplish tonight. I'm assuming you have a market study and a financial pro forma showing business feasibility for your future store. Whether you have an exact location or not, you should have a market study pro forma that shows this business feasibility within your community if you're going into stage 2B. That's actually the definition of going into stage 2B. You have a solid vision that you can articulate or say really quickly and easily that lines up with this feasible business plan. Meaning we have a feasible business plan based on a market study pro forma for a store this size, doing this, having this kind of products. And that's also the vision we're telling people out in the community. We're not saying we're going to have really low prices and be serving, the most low income customers in the community and even cheaper than Walmart. If that is not what your pro forma shows you can do, we're going to have a deli, but actually that's not going to fit in your layout. That you have a vision for how you're serving the community and how that store will serve the community that lines up with your feasible business plan. That you have a capable, knowledgeable board that gets things done, is functioning well. I didn't say perfectly, well. At least a couple of effective functioning committees that report to the board. If we're going into stage 2B and the board is still doing all of the work, there are not functional committees taking significant portions of the day-to-day work off of the board, we have a problem. And trusted experts and advisors you are walking this path with. By the time you're in stage 2B, you should not be doing this alone. You should have, and I don't mean just FCI, although we're honored to have you in our peer groups and be part of your process. I'm talking about at this stage, you have started to build relationships with organizations, with consultants that can help you through the real complexity of these late stages. Okay, so I'm assuming those things are in place if you're going into 2B, and very specific to this whole question of ownership in the late stages, that you have hundreds and hundreds of owners. You should not be entering stage 2B with a fully, let's say, a great business plan that has been tested out, maybe even a site, but you've got 200 owners, unless you are in a very tiny community. And I still think even then, no. We are that our ownership, that we actually have a significant amount of ownership before we're entering the stage. That you have a clear logo and brand for the co-op that is easily recognizable, super important in stage 2B to continue your ownership growth and awareness in the community. That you have strong communications with your owners and community through several channels, meaning through your newsletter and your social media and your website or whatever it is, but you have multiple ways that you are consistently communicating with your owners in the community and that you get a decent response to those. People open the newsletter, people are seeing your social media, that you're connecting through communications will be absolutely critical to be successful in stage 2B. And then an effective committee or staff focused specifically on ownership growth and or owner connection. So that committee can also be doing events and outreach, but you have to have it can't be on the board anymore. This really figuring out how we're going to get out there and we're going to grow ownership, how we're going to meet people, how we're going to make sure we have the materials, so forth. The board may be helping a little, but it cannot be on the board's back. If we're entering stage 2B, going into 3, without these things in place, we already have an issue in being able to appropriately address ownership and ownership growth through these stages. Okay. So that's just our little foundation of what I'm assuming where you should be, what should have in place before we're really looking at the question of ownership in stage 2B, stage 3, and opening. One last thought on that, you've got to have ownership goals that you've set to meet your co-op's needs to know if you're getting where you need to go. We do sometimes see co-ops kind of go, well, we're hoping to open with 1,000 owners because we saw it in some webinar from 2005, which happens. Ownership goals need to be specific. They need to meet your co-op's needs. They need to be set as an organization. They need to not be willy-nilly. The board and the committee working on ownership need to understand why those goals exist, why they're the right goals for your community, and how you're going to try and hit them. So by this point, you've got to have appropriate ownership goals or you won't get to where you're trying to go because you have no idea where you're trying to go. Because I get a lot of questions about this, what does appropriate ownership growth look like in these stages? Well, first we'll talk about ideal. Again, keeping in mind, if you are in a small rural community of 1,000 people, I am going to put numbers under this with the caveat. These numbers are based on some numbers we've seen repeatedly from co-ops of a certain size, and we'll talk about that size, but it's going to be different by community, okay? But one thing that's not is the type of speed of growth. So by the end of stage 1, we should have hundreds of owners. So I'm going to put in a number here. And if you're even in the tiniest of communities, we should at least have 200 owners. And if you're in some place like Chicago, a lot more than that. By the end of stage 2A, one important part of that stage is doubling our ownership. So from the end of stage 1 to the end of stage 2A, we should see around doubling of ownership. And then we are looking for from stage 2A to the end of 2B, about doubling. Again, tougher. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then from the end of stage 2B, when we either announce our site and or we have our site groundbreaking and we are good to go, we're moving forward, the real thing's happening, it's all over the press, we should be able to double our ownership again from the end of stage 2B when that announcement's made to before we open the store. That's our hope. This is an ideal world. And then we hope to grow the ownership from the end, from that opening day, another, and it should say 1.25, I should say another 25% by at least by the end of our first year open, if not the first 6 months. And just to look what this looks like in numbers, let's say you end stage 1 with 300 owners, then 2A, you're looking at, by the end of 2A, you're looking at being 600 owners. Hopefully, this is the leap that most co-ops don't make, doubling from 2A to end of 2B. 2B is a tough phase. We'll talk about that. And then again, this is idealized that we double again by the time we open. And then we see another 25% growth in that first 6 months to 12 months open. We're going to talk about why. Real quick, this is not consistent. We do tend to see that doubling from stage 1 to stage 2A if things are going well for a co-op, but we do see it is harder. From 2B is a hard stage to grow ownership. We're going to talk about it a lot. And so we sometimes see that slow down a little bit. That's okay. Not come to a dead halt. That is not okay. We'll talk some more about that, but slow down a little bit. That's okay. And then we often see it more than double between the end of 2B, announcing our site, groundbreaking, the whole deal. We sometimes see it more than double. That's where sometimes people really catch up. And then again, the hope is we'll see that 25% growth in the first 6 to 12 months of being open of the ownership again. This, what I'm talking about here, is it will not be consistent. These are idealized versions in a lot of ways, although this isn't far off from the numbers of some co-ops. A lot of these co-ops that have had numbers similar to this are all opening 8,000 to 10,000 square foot stores that are expecting to open at $3.5 to $4.5 million in sales in their first year, and they are in communities or areas of a pretty, significant population. Not large cities, but cities like Fredericksburg, Virginia, cities like Maynard, Massachusetts. So these numbers, they attained these types of numbers. But this is also happening in Detroit. Now, Detroit's ownership numbers are higher because it's a bigger city. But what can tell you still that Detroit's ownership growth from 2B to heading over to opening is real healthy, and they have the community behind them, is they're averaging and have been averaging for quite a while what evens out to about an owner a day. If they divided the calendar days by how many owners they've gotten, of course, it's come in dribs and drabs. But since they've put shovels in the ground, about an owner a day. Again, we're looking for that in communities of significant size. If you are in a very small community, it will be different for you. But they were looking for that momentum, and momentum is critical in ownership growth. And we're going to talk about why in more depth. But what we're really looking for in stage 2B and 3 is that we can continue the ownership momentum. We're not seeing major stalls. We'll talk a lot about why that's important. Okay. So I'm going to take a minute to talk about some of the big points to pay attention to in the concept of ownership between stage 2B and open. Now, keeping in mind, those of you who've been doing this longer, have watched more of our sessions, there's 3 main areas of work for every startup food co-op, which is ownership, and we sometimes call cooperative organizing, which is where growing ownership, connecting to the community is. There's governance and how we're going to manage and share power, the board and their work, and then there's business development. We're talking about that ownership piece of the work in these stages right now. So kicking off stage 2B, we want to have a clear picture of what our opening ownership goal is. That will be based partially by your pro forma. Once you've really, by this time, you have a feasible business plan, you've solidified the project, you know about how much money you need to raise and what forms you need it to come in by. And one of those forms is owner equity. And so you should have a good picture in there of what you need your ownership to look like by open, as well as and that number hopefully is based on some reality of how you've been able to grow ownership in your community and what is likely to happen and what is possible and what you've seen in communities similar to yours. We really need that goal as we kick into stage 2B. We need to know where we're going. Then we have to do keep ownership growth eking along in what I call the valley of despair. We'll get into that in more depth in just a short moment, meaning in the toughest part of stage 2B, when it's hardest, it is really hard to keep ownership growth going. We have to at least keep it, at least on life support. It has to be moving. We cannot come to a dead stop. Then site announcement. For those of you who are going to have site announcements, Nick's from a startup in the comments that is hitting that phase. So if you're going to have a site announcement at the end of stage 2B, now I know some of you will have a site. It is less common. It is less recommended for multiple reasons, but sometimes it's just absolutely necessary. And some of you have a site long before you're actually at the end of stage 2B. So it's not some big reveal at that point, but for the vast majority of us, it is. And so if it doesn't apply to you, just let it fly. We'll talk about groundbreaking. That will be your point. That'll be your magic ownership growth point that we need to focus on. They're very similar. If your co-op's going to both have a site announcement and then a groundbreaking, far later once you're fully funded, then you'll want to have a campaign at both points. But for those of you who you're not going to have kind of that big site announcement that's a big surprise when you already have hundreds and hundreds of owners, that's okay. Just focus on the groundbreaking, okay? You also might not be having a capital campaign to your owners. That also, still a lot of this applies, okay? So, but we need to have one of our focus points on ownership in stage 2B to open is a big campaign around site announcement. If we're doing a site announcement, we need that site announcement to catch fire in the community. And we have to leverage that moment. And a lot of how we know if we did that and we're successful is ownership growth. And there's been this myth believed in the past, and I think we even put it out there because it happened for some early startups. You just announce the site and all of a sudden people show up and you have lots of owners. And it's a lot more work than that. We have learned over the last 7 years. And so it doesn't just happen. You have to be prepared for it. Capital campaign, just something to have on your eyeballs, your radar, because of course, a lot of you are trying to meet certain ownership goals before you launch your capital campaign. Because, not going to get into it tonight, we know the average amount in all communities to do owner loan campaigns. There's pretty much an average amount per owner who will lend. And there's pretty much an average percentage of owners that will lend. And so to launch your capital campaign and raise X dollars, you can actually pretty closely estimate how many owners you're going to need to be successful. So a lot of folks are focusing on that moment for ownership growth. Like, we're going to announce the site, we're going to push that for as many owners as we can get. That should get us in range of this number. And then we're going to launch that capital campaign because we need, I'm making a number up, 1,200 owners to raise the amount of money that we need to raise, whatever that is. So that can be a real focal point of ownership growth in these stages. Then when you do groundbreaking happens when 2B is complete. 2B is officially fully and stage. Okay, 2B is complete when you announce the site is where that line has been historically. So 2B, we'll say right now this is considered 3A, up for debate. But when we break ground, we are fully funded, is our hope. I know a couple startups have broken ground before fully funded. Not going to get into that tonight. Not recommended. Not something we recommend. It has worked out for a few co-ops. It has not worked out for a few others. But hopefully that groundbreaking is happening once you're fully funded, and it is a celebration, and we need to be leveraging it. Again, we need the community to catch fire. We should be getting ownership growth. And then once the ground is broken, one of the things we really fall down on in ownership sometimes, although I'm seeing more and more startups do an excellent job around this, is taking the owners and community, but especially the owners, with you on the journey. I'm going to give you examples of that. And then you need a transition plan for ownership growth, because as you're hiring the GM and the GM's coming on board and taking over a lot of operations, are they going to take over ownership growth? Is that going to stay with the board until the store is open and they're able to hire an outreach coordinator or a marketing manager? Or what's going to happen with that? Because we can't lose momentum. So you'll be coming up with a plan with your GM on how that's going to continue to happen. And that'll be based on their strengths, your strengths, where they want help, where they don't want help. Don't assume GMs don't want you to continue to hold that piece. Quite often they do. And then last point we're really focused in on, post-open ownership growth. And we can't take the eye off that ball. And we often do because we've handed everything over to staff. And there's a reason why that tends not to work. And we'll go into a little more depth on that. I'm going to pause there and say, is there any comments, questions so far? And I can't always see the chat, so feel free to unmute as long as you're not talking to anyone if you have a quick comment or question. All right, I will continue with the lecture then. We'll keep going. All right. So why is ownership growth so important in the Valley of Despair? Okay, first I'm going to describe what the Valley of Despair is. It is a joke, but I think sometimes we have to be honest about how tough things get, and also we have to laugh. 2B, stage 2B is tough. Stage 2A, ownership growth, I mean, I'm not saying it's a cakewalk, but it's easy to do usually. It's not nearly as, there's a lot, people are just finding out about the co-op, they're still excited, there's still this sense, even though you never told them you were opening next year, people still have this sense like it's about to happen, and we get a lot of ownership growth. Okay, and then we get to 2B, and you're like, okay, and during 2A, you're proving the feasibility. You're coming up with a feasible business plan for what size this grocery store will be, what it'll carry, where it's gonna be located, what it can and can't do, how many jobs it might provide. You're really kind of figuring out what it can be that aligns with your vision, right? And so owners are still coming in, and then we hit this, we have a feasible plan, okay. And that feels like it should be super exciting. But at that point, what's going on with your owners? Anyone want to tell me, like, you've been growing owners for a couple of years now, you're finishing 2A, you're like, oh my God, we've come up with a feasible way, you know, we still have to raise all the money and find the site, but it looks feasible. We're ready to move forward. And this has been going on for a couple of years, and owners have been coming in. How do they feel at the end of stage 2A? What's your owner base's energy? Anyone want to share?
When is the store going to open?
Energy is completely lagging. You mean you just figured out how to do it now? You're not building it now?
Yes, exactly. And we need to do a better job of coaching you guys through how you take your owners actually with you during this phase. That's a whole different session. But that's exactly it. You guys, Purple Carrot, Chicago Market, got it exactly. By the time you're like, okay, we've learned all this stuff about how to build a feasible business, and we've brought on these partners to help us do that, and we've pushed and pulled all these numbers until we wanted to scream, and we figured out, and we've got it though. We can do it. We can build a store that meets what the owners are hoping for. And the owners are like, wah, wah, so open it tomorrow. And that's the beginning of 2B. This is rough because 2B is now we have to have a plan to execute. So we found it feasible, but how are you going to raise all that money? Where are you going to find the money? We found it feasible, but now we have to locate the site for a lot of you. Even if we have the site, we've got to figure out, we've got to do all sorts of testing, figure out if the site actually can be used that way. Maybe there's some remediation to the building. We have to find a general manager. There's so much work to be done to execute on that feasible plan, but the owners feel like they have waited long enough, right? And in the Valley of Despair, 2B, you're going to have times where that pro forma does not look like it's going to work. And I'm not saying that is out of the question. It does happen, but in a lot of startups cases, it takes a lot of pushing and pulling and moving of pieces and levers, but a viable way forward is found. But there are just times, anyone who's been through stage 2B knows there are times where you have just, I mean, I personally just went and locked myself in a closet and sat down and just cried because you're like, how, like, that grant didn't come through, this bank isn't working out, the site has this problem we didn't know about. I mean, there are tough moments in 2B, and ownership growth is dwindling as people are demanding, where's my co-op? Where's my store? Now, occasionally this doesn't happen to folks, and wonderful. We love that when that doesn't happen. Yeah, or you lose board members who also want to give up. Very good point, Dana. I mean, the value of despair is real. This is when we have to actually, like, we've been working our butts off, but now we have to, like, actually build the thing. And we haven't really figured out a terrific way yet as a movement. you know, about how do we keep people on board and understand that it's going to take this long and there are going to be moments like this. The board, the owners, we haven't gotten great at this yet. Lots of startups have gone through it and successfully opened stores, but I joke about it because it's so real. And so this is the hardest time to grow ownership. If you were having a really hard time growing ownership earlier, there are other problems. And I talked about those in my earlier session. And we can go in those more depth if you were in those earlier stages and struggling with ownership growth. But if you're in 2B, this is the hardest probably it's ever been, because you are already dwindling in energy, sometimes not sure how you're going to get this done, feeling like we wish more owners would help out and get something done with you. And you have to be rah, the co-op's going to happen. Here's the story. Come with us. Well, everyone's going, other than your core owners. And if you can't get that energy going, it's hard to grow owners, right? If you buy into the, you guys should have had a store open already, and it's hard not to, message that you get from folks, if you aren't really, if you can't really communicate why the co-op matters and why it takes long and why that's reasonable, and really to your own heart, you're going to have a hard time growing ownership. Okay. So the goal in 2B is not to let ownership growth stop. It will slow down. Okay. But why is it important to not let it stop? That we can't come to a full stop. We can't go, we've got other things to do. We'll just hopefully pick up ownership growth later. Why could that be harmful? If you've already got a good number of owners and then you'll have a site and you're going to leverage that, like, the last thing we have energy for, we're trying to fund this thing, find a GM, secure the site. The last thing we have the energy for is more rah, become an owner, but we still have to do it. Why? What harm could that do if we stopped? If anyone wants to share thoughts. Okay. Quiet group tonight.
I kind of feel like you just lose momentum. I mean, you're already losing some momentum, but you'll lose it all if you don't kind of keep something going, and you don't want people to forget about you.
Yes. This is actually the most dangerous, very good point, Dana. This is the most dangerous point to your credibility. You finally have a viable business plan. You have hundreds of people behind you. And now you need cities on board. You need lenders on board. You need owners on board to make loans to you. You need, you need the landlord on board, or the property manager, the property developer. Everyone's got to believe in the reality of this co-op. And if you don't have people interacting with the co-op, with your ownership, you're having no growth, it reeks. You can smell it. People know. They can sense the despair. And it's really tough. It's tough as a board and committees that are working on this work, but we can't let ownership growth completely stop, because we know how it is with loss of momentum, right? The amount of force it takes to start up momentum again, if we lose it, if we get that sense that we kind of disappeared and no one's really interested in the co-op and people aren't joining, and we lose our confidence in how to ask for ownership. And I've watched this just spiral downward, even in a very strong co-op. And that momentum is tough to rebuild. It will take more energy to rebuild, and it will put you at risk than just figuring out a way to keep it moving, even if it's not perfect, but to keep asking for ownership, finding a little more growth here and there, and keep it going. And again, some startups have really good growth during 2B, but it is the less common, for sure. I know there are many startups that are on this call tonight that ground to an almost halt at points in 2B. And it's tough. Now, you can regain the momentum. I'm not going to call names, but I think there's one or two startups on this call I think did all but utterly stop ownership growth at a certain point, didn't stop asking, didn't have energy. It wasn't really happening. Maybe they had a table at an event, but they weren't asking. And they have been able to pick it up again. But it is tough. And it is the time that all the world's eyes are on you and expecting you to prove this thing is serious. Okay. Gonna keep moving. So one thing to keep your eyeball on, we have to keep it moving even in the valley of despair. Next thing to keep your eyeball on in these stages, we have to have a plan for ownership growth at site announcement and or groundbreaking. It's really important. Why? Why is it important to have a plan at these stages? Like, you're like, well, if we just, again, we all have believed at one point or another, if we just announce the site, the people will come. And sometimes that happens. sometimes you do a decent site announcement, and people just people do come in. It's usually for the first month. Absolutely, you see a little increase in ownership growth, a nice burst, and there's a nice burst. But it is more common that we see that little burst, but it's not as big as the co-op hoped, and then it kind of goes back to where it was, unless we have a really good site announcement that we are, we make a big deal out of it on our social media, to the press, to our owners, via email, via an event, that we make it really big. And we know, our ownership growth committee, what committee's in charge of that, knows this is a critical moment for asking for ownership. They are prepared. They have the materials ready. They have their pitch ready. Why now's the time to join. And hopefully we even have a way that owners can participate in helping us get ownership. Like, hey, we announced our site, ta-da! Like, we're working on getting to 100 owners in the next 2 weeks after our announcement. Month, I like 2 weeks, depends on the size of your community. To really show everyone that the community is behind us, and here's how you can do it. We're doing an online campaign, and everyone you get to sign up or become an owner get entered in a drawing for X. We're having an event where you can bring your friends who aren't owners yet to the site, and there'll be snacks and treats, and they can become an owner. There's lots of different ways, but we have a plan. We don't go, the owners will come. And our plan is to remember to have our iPad and some ownership brochures at the announcement. That will not be enough. Even if you get a decent number of owners, you could have gotten so many more if you had a multi-layered plan for how you were going to leverage that into the big ask for people to join now. These are times of momentum. These are building. These are times of confidence and excitement when you make big announcements like this, and you need to seize those moments to get the growth. So we need to have a plan. Same with groundbreaking. And if you didn't have a big site announcement, or if you did, the site announcement and the groundbreaking are usually nowhere near each other, because we announce the site and then we have to fund it before we break ground. So the groundbreaking is off over here by itself. Same thing. We need to leverage that groundbreaking. Say, okay, now between now and opening, we're here and we need to be at this many owners. We're at 1,300 owners and we need to be at 2,000. Here's how you participate. Here's how you get involved, owners. Here's how you help us. Now's the time to join. Here's why. Have a plan, have messaging. These are critical points of ownership growth to have your eyeballs on. And if you're like, we already did our site announcement and it went, well, you have a chance to recover that at groundbreaking. You can make a lot of ground up when you have your big event and the shovels and the mayor and your board chair and whatever, in the photo ops. You have a big opportunity to do it again. If we make a site announcement and we make all the efforts to get people's attention and to get ownership growth, and we don't get it, that's an important message. It's rare. I have seen it, only I'd say really seen it once. But if we don't we attempt to get a big boost of ownership growth at the site announcement or the groundbreaking time, so that dirt act and like that month and a half afterwards, and we should see elevated growth for, starts coming down, but elevated growth for a while. If we're not seeing that, we didn't get the message out. Maybe we just need to go back out and do a better job of making sure everyone heard about what is going on. It could be people don't like the site so much, which we have seen. There actually is a startup that went with the site, got okay growth from it, planned for it, had to let go of the site. And when they let go of the site, found out from the community that a wide swath of the community hated the site. So that was intriguing. But the ownership growth matters, and you're watching it when you make these announcements, because if you don't get the bump, it is a very good measure of how much the community knows that the co-op is going forward and it's a big deal, and how much the community buys in to the whole concept of the co-op, its vision, and that location. Take a quick pause there. Any comments, questions? Thank you. I keep getting, I got a private chat from someone who's like, and I saw it in the public chat too. It's like, nope, I just wish we'd known all this sooner. Okay. That's okay. I'll give it just another second. Anyone have any comments or questions?
This is fertile ground. And we would just like to admit before all of our that we wish we had done all of these things earlier. And now we're seeing each day how important each one is, and we are moving forward, implementing them as quickly as possible. And I know, as JQ said, sometimes it's funding for staff or what have you, but many of these we could have done. So thank you for reinforcing, and we're on the right track.
You guys are. You've done a lot of work to build up. You've been doing great. So thank you for saying that. Fertile Ground, I think, did struggle leveraging their site announcement for ownership growth, but they took that message to heart. And that's, you know what, you're going to get to the opening of your store and you're going to be able to look back and point to all the things you guys didn't do right or what you weren't strong at and all this other stuff. Every startup, there are going to be mistakes made. There are going to be areas where your team just wasn't as strong and other areas where you guys were rock stars. And it's going to all balance out and level out. So this is one of Fertile Ground's struggle points. They struggled to leverage their announcement to really get ownership growth, but they did the most critical thing. They saw that, they took that to heart, and they've been doing some great course correction. And I get their texts all the time. So if you don't get their text, you should sign. I'm kidding. Don't everyone sign for their text because they get charged for that. But they are doing some really great communication work. Okay, I'm going to go into the next point on the little map, taking owners with you. We have a site. We are mostly funded. Maybe the GM's been hired, maybe we're about to ground break, but from there on, like kind of like that GM hire ground break line, whichever one comes first, we need to be taking the owners with us. It is so critical. We have watched startups, and this is something we all had to learn together. We didn't really know this about 6 years ago. Sorry about my yowling old cat. She gets confused. And they didn't do it. They're like, okay, we raised all the money. And then they sent out newsletters and stuff, but they kind of didn't say, hey, owners, look what we're doing. Look what we're accomplishing. We built this together. Here's the next thing, showing the pictures, like taking them with you. I know that as a board member, you put in just so much, exponentially so much more work than any individual owner who has volunteered once or never and has bought a share. But honestly, to take the leap to invest in a co-op, to believe in this thing, to maybe tell a few neighbors about it, amidst everything else you're doing in your life, this idea that may or may not actually bear fruit is an investment. It's a big leap. And they feel like they've kind of, they put a vote of confidence in you and have been waiting for things to happen. And now to say, okay, well, we're going to go build a store. We'll talk to you later, which is how it can feel. It can really make them feel pretty dissed. Like, oh, well, I bought my share or I made my loan and now you're kind of done with me. And that's never the intention, of course, ever, but it can happen. And we know that when we take the owners with us, we build some incredible momentum. The word really, because our owners are jazzed, they're excited, they're proud, they know what they're proud of. They're sharing posts, they're telling people like, yeah, this is what my co-op's doing. You should join my co-op. But also just all of that talking and sharing and warmth and buzz. And I'm proud and I'm wearing my t-shirt at the picnic and the company picnic or whatever is getting up momentum and buzz for your co-op in the community that gets ready to go, oh, there's going to be a new grocery store. The people who may never join, we need them. Now we're at the stage, we need them too. Our owners need to be buzzing and proud and know exactly what's going on because they are one of the biggest pieces of building that customer base for when that store opens. On top of the fact, they just matter and they're the whole co-op. But I just want to give you some quick examples. So many co-ops doing it right these days, doing really, I would say some of the ones doing the most consistent, excellent job in social media and in email of carrying people along right now would be Food Shed Co-op. I'd go look at what they're doing and what they have done over the last year. Prairie Food Co-op, what they've done over the last year. Wild Onion has done some really good work around this. And Detroit and Flint have, when they've had time to work on communications, have done a good job here. need to communicate more, but the examples are excellent that you do see. So check those out as well. In Suncoast, Chicago Market. But I would say if I was going to like go gold star it would be Food Shed and Prairie, and how they've communicated, at least on social media, where you can go look at the history of how they've taken people with them. So important, yes, pictures of groundbreaking and all that good stuff. And we've got a picture of Chicago Market here, the board chair and the GM. The mayor of Chicago was involved in a decision to make sure they got these TIF funds, these government funds that were going to help open the co-op, and they got to do a photo op with the mayor of Chicago. I don't care how big your city is. If you have a photo op with your mayor, you know, like take people along. Look what we did. We got this important person in our community to believe in this and make us a grant. You've got Wild Onion giving store tours. Like it's an empty space. There's nothing in there yet, but people love. Now make sure it's okay with your insurance and with the construction team. But people love going on the store tours. They don't really even care. I have seen some of this will tape out spaces. I saw one co-op. Were building from scratch, so there was nothing but dirt. They went around and used those, what are those little things, those little rollers with paint, and they marked out where the building would be and where each department would be. And they had people show up to walk the co-op on the grass. These things are critical. Help them see it. When that general manager joins the team, oh my God, that is your new rock star. Introduce that general manager. Have a live Q&A session. Have a welcoming the GM party where people can come meet them. You know, I know Prairie's doing a good job where I think it's weekly or monthly, but they have an update from the GM and it's a little video talking about what's going on. Jason talks to them about what's getting done and where they're at. You need to take people with the Detroit picture I love because they're inside of a building called the Detroit Food Commons, and they printed grocery bags that said Detroit Food Commons, and she got one, this board member, and she went to stand at their site with her grocery bag and said, see, we're gonna have grocery bags, and right here, this fence, we're gonna shop here together. Even that can create a sense of taking people with you. And what I don't have photos of here, it may seem boring to you, but when things like the building's being built and the HVAC system arrives and it's this big thing they're putting in with a crane, people totally want to see that. Take them through every step, show them the process, make them feel they're building it with you, and you will create incredible momentum and you will attract more owners. Comments, questions on that? I know there's folks on here who've done some of that work. If you want to share any thoughts. I've got one question. Yeah, we put pictures. Yes, Dana, tell them that story because it sounds boring, but it really works. People loved it.
So it's not our building in the sense of we own it. We are tenants in the building, but there was a lot of water issues in the basement and we had to do some major waterproofing, and it involved like hazmat suits and all kinds of crazy things. But we took pictures before and after, our great pictures. So look at what it looked like before, which was pretty scary, and look at what it looks like now. And so they know that their money is also being used in a good way. I thought that was really helpful for that. But I didn't even really get to go in the building during the time that was happening. So as a board member, I was super excited to just see the after pictures and know that it was like working and going along. I do have a question, JQ. Mm-hmm. Which is not related to our waterproofing. And the question is, I totally get your message. I know what you're saying at this point in time, but there are times when we will think something is going to happen, like we're getting a city agency approval on something, or we're going to finally close on our loan. And we allude to it as part of our messaging, but then something happens and it doesn't happen. And it's like another month or another 2 months or 3 months, and we feel like we're kind of like, how do you say stuff and bring them along when things aren't happening on the timeline that you thought they were going to and you started to communicate to? Does that make sense?
Is an excellent question. That's really good, Dana, because that does happen. And with some projects more than others, you know, it takes longer to get that permit. It takes longer for that grant to release than you thought. So you can start this. So what can we focus on? And yes, striking that balance between what we can actually deliver versus, you know, hinting at things that you may not be able to deliver and getting that balance right. My one piece of advice that I see co-ops kind of underplay that they could do more with during that like, we don't know exactly what we can tell people phase. We have a building, but we're waiting for the grants to come through, or waiting for the permits, and everything's just been in limbo longer than we'd like. I know Prairie's been there, you've been there, a lot of co-ops have been there. So how do we take them along? Yet if we've been taking them along and we start being quiet, that's gonna be a problem too. Leverage, please leverage your GMs and your vendors and so forth more. Talk about, I mean, I could come up with a million things based on your store design, which you have. To be able to talk about, like, this is our hopes and plans over here, or here's a vendor that will definitely, that had a meeting with us, or had a meeting with our GM last week, will definitely be part of this. You know, who we're looking at having this kind of thing in place for the staff, like anything and everything you can share about what their shopping experience might look like, what vendors might be on the shelf, what might be in place for staff, what are the first roles you're going to hire for, if you know that for sure. And say, you know, when the time is ready, you know, one of the first roles we'll hire for is X, and this is why. So they can see the business planning mind going. So they can see, like, any of those pieces that you can, anything that your GM has decided that seems utterly unsexy, I can find a sexy angle to. And of course, we want to be careful not to share something the GM doesn't want shared. But I think even just taking the stuff that they're happy being public knowledge, it's just taking those and trying to figure out how to turn it into a gem. But I love that you brought up this point, and for your peers to hear that too, is that some things we don't want to hint at, because if we can't deliver and we aren't in control of when delivery happens, it can make us look worse. Yes, yes. Grant's done a great job with putting out videos. So if you get a chance to look at Chicago Market, they've been putting out videos of farm visits with their GM, which is excellent. I would say just diversify a little. If there's anything Dan can tell you about, you know, anything from, you know, first positions he'll hire to staff structure to way that the deli is going to work. You know, we're going to have, we're going to have a blank here. I'm not going to say what exactly, but I know some quotes like, we're going to have, you know, roast your chickens, you know, and we're going to be doing those in house. Did you know that takes these two pieces of equipment, and we're going to be able to have those fresh every day? Like, just anything that gives them a picture into the business planning. So you guys have been doing great on the vendors, and I would diversify that a little more and be less scared of just saying the permits and the money take time, and, you know, we're working on it and we share updates as soon, and this is the most recent update and we hope to have more soon, but focus on those other pieces. Thanks for a great question. I'm going to keep us moving. There's a couple more things I want to cover. So ownership growth is also super important at your opening and in that first year. Why? One thing is, take a look at that pro forma again. You estimated a certain amount of growth of owner capital, of owner shares increasing. That's a cash flow that you are expecting that will be critical and important as your store is open. Missing that will really hurt. So on just a pragmatic level, we need that capital coming in. But the other reason is because if we don't continue to have ownership growth, people can get pretty disinvested from the co-op pretty fast. It can be a barometer of that. And the reason why it tends to happen is your staff is just learning how to run a grocery store. They don't get hired that long before the store opens. And you can't really practice what it's like to run a store until it opens. And they're going to be adjusting product, and they're going to find out things are wrong with the POS, and some staff aren't going to stay, and they need to hire and train more people. They are just trying to get that grocery store to fire on all cylinders. And even if you have a marketing person, they're focusing on trying to just get the word out about the grocery store, make sure people come in and support it, and we have those sales. And the last thing, not because no one cares about it, but the last thing to happen is to get people trained, get staff trained how to sell ownership, and to even really understand and care about ownership. And it can flatline. And we have watched stores that had good openings, but then didn't meet their sales goals. And every time I can watch their ownership go like, their ownership growth just toilet after opening the store. Not that it's causing that, but it's a good barometer. It's a really good barometer, because we're doing more than selling groceries. I'm going to get into that second. And if we're not also selling the concept of the co-op, if people don't feel value from shopping at the co-op, then is more than the awesome groceries they can get there, which is indicated by ownership growth, then we are definitely not going to hit sales, because that is not the only thing we're selling. Groceries is not the only thing we're selling. Other people can kick our butts at that. I'm going to go into that second. So this is critical. What is your GM's plan? Can your GM keep ownership growth going? Can you hand that over to them before open? A lot of GMs will tell you no, and they don't want it. And that's okay, that they need that to stay on the committees and the board. They want to like have a voice and hear, come maybe attend meetings and give some input, or maybe they want to help out, but they don't want responsibility for ownership growth. They are way too busy making sure the business will be successful. Sometimes the GM does want that. They do want control over that. You'll have to talk about that and negotiate it out. This is a good place to tell the GM to let us help. We have become the experts at selling ownership in their community and getting people to join. Let us do what we're good at, and possibly even let you help and participate in training staff. Definitely, you guys should be helping by having a table at opening day, or maybe as much as possible the whole opening week, where people can join and become an owner and not have to go through the register, because those lines are going to be crazy. If your GM has done their job, those lines are going to be just wild. Okay. And people sometimes just want to join or come talk about ownership, and you're going to have a table for that. You're going to help keep that going. The staff's not going to have time for that, because they're going to find 20 things that are most popular items that aren't in the POS. I mean, there's just going to be things happening, right? Lines out the door generally every time. So you're going to be helping them with that to keep that momentum going. But we have to make sure the staff knows how to keep that momentum going before we just hand it off to them, because that lack of momentum will hit your sales eventually, and it definitely will hit your cash flow. And so it is critical that ownership growth continues, and that you and the GM have a plan, whatever that plan is, that you come together as a team, and like, does the board and the committee going to keep this? At what point do we hand it to the staff? And to say, what is your plan for training the staff and having them hit ownership growth goals? If you don't have a plan, we're going to stay in. If you have a plan, awesome, but we'd like to know that you do, because this tends to fall by the wayside. Real quick, for those of us who are visual, this is supposed to represent all these black dots, hundreds and hundreds of owners. They democratically elect a board. That's most of you guys on this call doing all this work to start this food co-op. And then amongst them, they hire management that runs the store, right? Okay. Why does this ownership stuff really, really matter? Why do I harp on it so much? What if you have a viable business plan, a site, funding, and the owner numbers just aren't really there? Because we have no success stories, not one. If we did, I would tell you, I'd totally be down with that. We have none of these folks. What I'm pointing to over here is the board and the management and the consultants and the experts, that small group that will be doing most of the business development work, most of the growth of the co-op work. We have no success stories of these folks opening and keeping open a startup food co-op without the ownership, without an appropriate level of ownership and continued ownership growth. We have none. We actually do have a story of a food co-op opening way under the number of owners they needed, fully funded, beautiful store, ready to go, and they did not last. One had to be sold. It's still in operation, but it's not a co-op, and one closed. I could tell detailed stories. This doesn't work. It is not just a feel good, like, oh, warm fuzzy, people get to feel like they own something. Like, no, this stuff is critical to business success. We do not have stories. We don't get over the finish line. If there aren't enough owners to get the work done, they come into the core and get the work done, or we get the store open and we don't have people who are enthusiastic. The community is not enthusiastic about the co-op. If they were, they would have joined. And so they don't show up and shop either. Now, not only your owners will show up and shop, what we do find is only about 40 to 50% of your owners pre-open will be regular shoppers. Lots of new people will come in, but the whole community is not buying it if you don't have anywhere near the appropriate number of owners at the time of open. So they aren't going to buy it just because even if you have a gorgeous, pretty store. Okay, because co-ops don't just meet the need for groceries. Co-ops are successful because we offer great grocery stores and a different way of being that we all long for. And that is absolutely what you are selling just as much as groceries. And that is not baloney. And that is not like we're tricking people. That is legitimately, we are all investing in great groceries. And a lot of us are there because I like the way I'm treated when I'm here. I like knowing my money goes back to the community. I like knowing my money's going to the farmers. I like that they have these community events and care about us. Because we feel like human beings, and like this co-op is partially our investment in how we want our communities to be. And people absolutely, when the story is told well, we take them with us, will join, and they will shop because of that. And they will thank you for the privilege to do it, even if you don't always have the cheapest prices. They'll still complain about your prices, but the chain grocery stores can out grocery store you on prices, on slick design, on having the newest and fanciest services. If that's all you're offering is groceries and a grocery store, you cannot compete. But if you're offering this little drawing for real, where the community has come together and has built a co-op and believes in it and believes in the vision and has joined and has empowered you to build this store, then the chains can't dream of having the level of loyalty you will have for your store. But if you're not offering that, if you haven't really offered a vision and a way to participate and a store that reflects the values of the community and took them along the journey and really resonates with those values that they have, if you're not having that success pre-open, you will not have it post-open. It gets harder after opening to continue to get people to understand why the co-op matters. It's not impossible, lots of co-ops do successfully, but it is not easier than it was pre-open, even though you have a pretty shiny store. All right, I am going to go ahead and wrap us up, but I can stay and answer any questions and have conversation for those that would like to have a more casual conversation or continue with a few questions after this. I do want to share real quick. We have 4 sessions tomorrow. It's the only day that we have 4 sessions. We had one speaker who's just incredible and could only fit on this day, so we added a slot. So we have some great stuff happening tomorrow. Do not miss it. Although the Cultivating Black Food Sovereignty session is actually past capacity at this point, but all the other ones still have some space to join us. Thank you so much again to our sponsors who have made this entire series possible. We could not do it without them.